Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
All right, gentlemen, welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that some people try to avoid, and yet, ironically, whenever we try to avoid it, the more we end up talking about it. Which is, politics relative to men and women relating to each other. And I have a returning guest with me today who is absolutely the right guy to talk to about how the recent election cycle may possibly affect how men and women relate, at least in the short term, but maybe even over the longer term. Before we get to that, I want to remind you guys that I'm at Scott McKay, SCOTMCKAY. Scott has one T, of course. That's important, by the way, because there's some other cat out there like carrying an axe and destroying things in the name of right-wing politics. That is not me. Corey probably knows him personally, but it's not me. That's Scott with two T's, and he's not me. But you can find me at Scott McKay on X, on TikTok, on YouTube, and Truth Social, of course. And you can also find me at Real Scott McKay on both Instagram and Threads. The website is, as always, mountaintoppodcast.com. And gentlemen, if you're not a part of our Facebook group, the Mountaintop Summit, you're cordially invited. We're waiting for you there. As mentioned, you can hear him already enjoying this episode in the background. My returning guest today is none other than Mr. Corey Nathan out of Santa Clarita, California, which is a place I know well. He is the host of his own podcast called Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. Corey, welcome back, man.
Scott, thanks for having me back. I really appreciate you thinking of me.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Guys tend to roll their eyes when we're, talking politics and religion on this show.
Yeah.
That's your gig, not mine. But if our tendency is to bury our heads in the sand and just pretend those two topics are never going to come up, when we talk to women, we're meeting women, we're dating women, relating to them, maybe if we're married to them, right?
Yeah.
We're really not going to be prepared. And that's kind of against the whole Boy Scout credo, isn't it?
Yeah. Be prepared. Be prepared. Yeah. So a lot of the preparation that I do is kind of preparing my heart and my mind. And that is preparing my heart and my mind to do a lot more listening than talking. And, sometimes you're going to end up listening to stuff you don't like to hear, but that's okay. I think the person that you're speaking with, your significant other, your sister, your mom, your wife, your whoever, your friend, your colleague at work, they're going to appreciate feeling heard and seen more than anything that you could say that you think might persuade them one way or the other.
Yeah, I think that's basically a human trait. That goes all the way back to Stephen Covey, doesn't it? 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of them was seek first to understand before trying to be understood.
Yeah. He's one of my favorites. I read that in the early 90s. And another good one, it kind of has to do with this, but understanding the difference between urgent versus important, and,
yes.
And it might feel urgent, and the urgency has this guise of feeling important. It might not be. It might be tertiary, but understanding what's important. And what's important is that connection that you have, again, with your significant other, your colleague, your mom, your relative, your whatever, your neighbor, and being able to relate to them and connect with them.
Yeah, interestingly enough, that's the third time today I've heard the word tertiary.
Oh, okay. Third time, tertiary.
Yeah.
Not primary, secondary, but the tertiary time you've heard tertiary.
Yeah, the secondary time was about an hour ago. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Glad I could do that for you. Tertiary cubed.
Yes, right. Exactly. You talked about a Charles Hobbs time management feature there, which is urgent versus important. And it's interesting, even back in the 80s when that seminar was popular and they were teaching people how to manage their time, right? That was one of the major themes of it. And this is before smartphones and social media basically bombarded us. Probably the proper word is assaulted us with urgency that's utterly unimportant, every minute of every day, right?
Yeah.
Even back then, though, this was an issue before there was even an internet. And the example that I remember from the Hobbs time management course was, if the phone starts ringing, you'll answer it. We're talking a landline here,
Right.
A physically ringing phone. You have a Pavlovian response as a human being, an urgency in answering it because, oh my God, it's begging me to answer it. It's demanding my time like a crying baby, right? And we were all laughing. I actually took the physical seminar. I sat in the room and took it. And we were all laughing because how many times in your life has the phone literally been a life or death family emergency? Maybe twice in your entire life. But, you could be late for a meeting. You can be on your way to drop kids to school before they're late. You can have something a lot more important that you've got to do. But when that phone rings, you'll drop everything and answer it.
Yeah.
Because you're conditioned.
It's a really good point. And I think it is related to how we communicate these days. I often say, listen, if your wife is in labor, or about to be, she's in like 9.5 months pregnant. Okay, keep your phone on. Otherwise, or if you're a doctor and somebody, is waiting to receive their heart transplant or something, and you're the one who's going to oversee, okay, great. Otherwise, you could turn your phone off. It's okay. The world's not going to end. The world's going to keep on spinning. It's fine. And the way that relates to how we communicate, whether it's something online or in a room or around the Thanksgiving table, is the people who are the loudest and the most obnoxious often, who also happen to be often the least informed, but just have the loudest opinions about stuff. They have the disguise of that urgency and that importance, if you will, from what we were talking about before. But there's often other people around that table or maybe on that Facebook thread or whatever that maybe just liked it but didn't comment because they don't want to get lost in that shuffle. They don't want to fight with the loudest voice in the room. That's the person that I'm interested in hearing what they have to say. But it takes a little bit of proactive curiosity, of leaning into it. It looks like you have an opinion about that. I'd be curious what you thought, and open the door that way to the important person with an important idea that doesn't feel like it's urgent because they haven't voiced their opinion in a loud, obnoxious way.
The first thing I thought about when you were talking is that very guy who, has to keep his phone on if his wife's 9 months pregnant. Once she's actually in labor, he probably is going to have his nose buried in his smartphone.
Yeah.
How the world revolves nowadays is just maniacal, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it does take practice, though, to stay in the moment, to there's so many distractions, man, taking you away from a great vacation. I was just on vacation with 3 of my best friends and their families that we all grew up together. We're still in touch. It was great, and the kids and all of us. It takes practice to put that phone down. Whatever's coming through, it's not as important as the fact that me and my friends have been together, and dear, dear friends for almost 50 years, if you can imagine that. That's important. Being there, having pizza, having a glass of wine or beer, bourbon or whatever it is, your drink of choice, and being there together, really just enjoying our time together. So that's, but like I said, it takes practice.
Oh yeah, it sure does. Even for people who are grizzled veterans like you and me, we can still be subject to these bad habits that come around nowadays that keep us from relating as humans. I mean, good God, man, when we take our kids out west in the RV, we can be driving through the Yellowstone freaking ranch territory in Montana, and it's gorgeous, and the kids aren't even looking out the window. They're like nose buried in smartphones. We have to like yell from the driver's seat up front, hey, get off the iPad and look out the window. Oh, yeah, that's cool. And then, it's like pulling teeth, man. And this is the younger generation.
Yeah.
The whole living vicariously through ourselves bit, which I talk about. Don't have an adventure yourself. That's too dangerous. That's too unsanitary. That's too fraught. Watch somebody else on TV do it. But even when we're in the adventure ourselves, we get distracted. So turning our attention to relationships between men and women, it's amazing any of us get through a first date with a woman or approach a woman and talk to her and have any kind of even expectation for a real human connection by the time the interaction's done.
Right.
And yet it seems to me the first guy to step up to the plate and make a modicum of an effort here wins with women. I mean, people are starving for this. It's like this weird situation where we're starving and we forget we're starving as if that were possible. But once that social interaction opens up, people are like, oh yeah, this humanity, people relating, looking someone in the eye, actually, God forbid, flirting with a real human being. This is actually kind of nice. Where has this been my whole life? Right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're right. There's this tendency to get stuck on our phones because our brains literally react to certain stimuli that we get on our phones. Sometimes it's something that's stimulating anger or fear or other emotions. But there have been many studies done. Jonathan Haidt, I think, has done a lot of work on this, as has Denver Riggleman when he was doing some intel work for Congress, when he was in Congress, that our brains literally chemically react in the same way as getting a hit of crack cocaine to certain stimuli when we're on our smartphones, dumb phones, if you will. But I think we could cut through that because we're tapping into a deeper humanity, and it's like it's a trick, but it's not really a trick. The trick is like I said before, leaning into it, oh, that's interesting. Why do you feel that way? Oh, that's, asking that follow-up question, listening to the person closely enough to be able to ask a follow-up question. What happened in your life when you start to feel that way or develop that position?
What the hell's wrong with you, man?
Well,
how did you get abused as a child?
That's one way to ask it. It could be a confrontational way to ask it.
Yeah.
But the way to, what I'm getting at is, if you ask a person a question that allows them to tell their story, then you're starting to tap into something deeper. Then you're starting to really connect,
Yeah, I'm just teasing you, man.
I know.
100% on board with you. It's interesting. You were talking a few minutes ago about how certain people are just loud, whether they're informed or not. And those people grab the mic and they spew whatever information they're going to spew online. And one of the probably most comically ironic phenomena that happened during the last election cycle was people misinforming us about misinformation and disinformation, and entire blog posts about the difference between disinformation and misinformation. And they're all a bunch of liars. Once the dust clears from the election, everybody's shaking hands and they're back in Congress and everybody's changing their opinion on things. And, the people who are in the, for example, left-wing media still trying to convince everybody that Donald Trump is Hitler or something. They're like, dude, that's so 2024. Move on. Find something new and interesting and completely titillating to scare us with. That's old news,
Yeah.
And yet, here we are. It is 2025. Donald Trump will be the president, whether people like it or not. It seems to me people really are sick of the politics. They really are fatigued from this last election cycle. And really, it was the third election cycle in a row that was so tiresome. And I'm sure you noticed, as my wife and I and others have, that in 2016, 2020, and 2024, there was no break from it. I asked my wife when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, how long do you think it'll take for the Democrats to stop being angry about this and pushing the narrative? And my wife goes, I don't know. I said, I don't think they ever will. I think it'll just get worse. And I don't know if I was prescient. I don't think it took a high-powered crystal ball to figure out that was going to be the case. But man, it became get Donald Trump for 4 years. And then it became Joe Biden is in office and get him. And now that Donald Trump is in his second term, weirdly, it feels like at large, the nation has calmed down. All right, well, here we are. Let's see what this guy is going to do. Is he going to keep his promises? Is he really going to turn this into, some kind of communist dictatorship or whatever? No, that was the other side that was going to do that. Yeah, you know what? I'm sick of talking about it. The gas prices come down and I get eggs back on the shelf at the grocery store. I'm Gucci, and everybody just seems like they want to move on finally. And it took 8 years. Do you feel that a little? I know you're in California.
Yeah. So I have some differences of opinion on that.
Well, let's have them. Yeah.
Well, I think you're touching on a lot of things that are resonant. There are a lot of folks who are exhausted, just exhausted.
Oh, yeah.
The election came and went. The losing side, one of the biggest areas of differences, I think part of why we're experiencing a relatively peaceful transfer of power is because the losing side accepted the results of the election. I was very concerned about what would happen if Kamala won. Because if Donald Trump has proven anything time and time and time again, he only accepts elections that he wins, that elections that he likes the results of. Otherwise, he's going to contest it, whether it was fair and free and completely verified or not. So I was concerned about that. So one of the reasons that we're experiencing a smooth transfer of power is that the losing side accepted the election and they're participating in that transfer of power. But the other thing, largely speaking, is that, yeah, there is a sense of exhaustion. It's like, damn, we did all this work, the losing side. We did all this work. We've been pushing this narrative, did all these rallies, all these concerts, all these everythings, and the dude still won. So what are we going to do now? And a lot of folks of the minority are still trying to assess, okay, do we fight? Do we move somewhere else? What does resistance look like? What's an effective way to move forward? How do we accept the fact that a majority ended up voting for this guy again? A small majority, the smallest majority since the late 1800s, but he did in fact win the popular vote. So I think it's in the however many stages of grief. I don't know what stage we're in right now, but a lot of it is acceptance of the reality while trying not to get too, the people that I'm speaking with that are really most upset are trying to figure out, trying not to get too caught up in their own anxieties. Kind of what you were saying, like, oh, it's going to, we're going to become an authoritarian state and all that. They're doing their best to stay in the moment, to not get hyperbolic about what's to come. I do have specific concerns about, just starting with our First Amendment freedoms. But again, like, I also at the same time believe in our the institutions of this democratic republic and the balance of powers. So that's like I said, there are a few areas of points of difference between you and me on how we're seeing things. But right now, I think a lot of people that I'm speaking with and what I'm observing just sociologically is folks are just figuring out how to get through the day and move on and not get caught up in the crazy that's been since basically 2015.
Well, I think we're basically on the same page. You may see things different in your locale in Southern California. I mean, I'm in Texas. I live in a rather liberal part of Texas. I live in San Antonio. Interestingly,
by the way, not to interrupt you, but I live in probably one of the most purple districts in the country.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
Yeah. California 27. It was 25, but it's California 27 now. Our state Senate seat, our state assembly seat, our U.S. House seat were all some of the most closely contested in the entire nation. So I appreciate it. It allows me to speak with folks because I vote sometimes Republican, sometimes Democrat, depending on what level of local, state, federal, and more conservative often on the propositions. But, I guess I'm reflective of the district that I'm in, but I get to speak with folks, some pretty far left, some pretty radical right, a lot of folks, a vast majority of folks that are a lot more nuanced in their views.
That's true.
Purple.
And they're not the noisy ones.
Yeah, they're not the
right.
Exactly. They're not the noisy ones. So.
Yeah, it's the radical people who really want sweeping change and are angry about it, and especially people who have one particular axe to grind, one particular political issue that they really want to hammer. Those are the people who are, the rabble rousers online.
Right.
Meanwhile, the rest of us shut up and we vote. And, there were signs in my neighborhood, and I've talked about them even on this show, that were like, Harris Waltz, obviously. And it's like, wait a minute. You're saying Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, and your campaign sign basically obviates there even being a choice. And I think people just couldn't see the forest for the trees because in many ways, and I believe we talked about this in our previous show, so we're not going to flog a dead horse. That's probably a very alive horse out in the zeitgeist. But politics basically has become the religion.
Yeah.
If you're not on my side, my holy war, my jihad, you're Satan.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's what idolatry is. Idolatry.
For sure.
We tend to think that idolatry is 180 degrees different from the way that we observe, however we observe or don't observe, right? That there's this God, there's this truth and whatever, and there's this way to, worship God and be a part of the people of God and what have you. And that idolatry is building an idol, a golden calf or what have you. Well, the thing about the golden calf was that a lot of what they were doing, a lot of the rituals that they were going through looked a lot like the rituals that they were commanded to do. So the idolatry that's really pernicious is the idolatry where we're doing a lot of the same things that we're used to doing, going to church, doing Bible study, doing whatever, but we're introducing in 1 degree or 2 degrees or 5 degrees of difference that makes it something altogether different. So when we're introducing politics and injecting it with the language of God, that's a really pernicious idolatry.
I was reading about a pastor of a church in North Hollywood, California, relatively in your neck of the woods, right?
Yeah, 20 minutes away.
Yeah, and he's losing his parishioners because he won't take a side from the pulpit. Yeah. He's trying to look at politics from both sides, and everybody's leaving him. And it is absolutely the case. What you're talking about is even people who label themselves Christians or Jews or in many cases even Muslims, believe it or not, are really idolizing the God of politics. And let me tell you something, Corey. I don't know if you're going to agree with me on this or not. I suspect you will. That God is a strict mistress. She is. It's a she. The God of politics is a she. Pretty sure.
Yeah.
And it's a fear-based religion. It's all fear-mongering. You end up worshiping at the altar of fear, and that gets ugly from a sociological perspective, especially when people aren't socializing, when they're not really talking to each other. People start fearing their neighbor, and, these priests of the political religion start suggesting that neighbors become the Stasi with each other. And we have this Eastern German situation where, see something, say something, meaning, this guy wasn't wearing a mask, or this person's voting for the wrong candidate. Oh my God, they need to be put in a camp. But if you vote these other people in, they're going to put us in camps. And just the level of rhetoric is so obviously driven by fear. And women, of course, are safety-seeking creatures. And so I would say that we as men should be peacemakers and removers of fear. And meanwhile, women, when they're feeling very afraid, their claws come out. And then we go out on dates with them, and they're looking for ways to protect themselves and getting a little defensive. And dating and relating before November of last year was rough because guys didn't see this proverbial forest for the trees, and they were going out with very scared women. And they were coming off those dates going, well, what did I do? Maybe this chick is just a raging bitch and all women are awful. And I was telling guy after guy in particular, just wait until the election's over. Give her a chance to breathe. And I don't know if people like being afraid, but they sure have become addicted to it. They sure have become a lot more susceptible to it, I think, than we have in a long time, at least. And I think people have got fatigued from that too. People just want to go out and live their lives again.
No, absolutely. The fear, like I said before, it's literally a chemical reaction, and we do get addicted to it. You're not wrong about that. There's a physiological addiction to that hit, basically.
It becomes a habit.
It becomes a habit, and we go back for more. And then we don't know how to get through a day. This isn't just women; it's all human beings. We don't know how to get through a day without it. We got to check that Facebook and reply to that guy who commented, or, I'll tell you what, but there's something else to that too. And it's more pervasive. And that is one of my best friends were partners in a company. He runs a day to day, and we have great conversations. But one of the prominent factors that dictated how he was going to vote was he's just so tired of being lectured by a lot of the women in his life, including his wife, about how he should think, how he should vote, how he should behave, how he should talk, what words he can use, what phrases he can't use. He was just tired of it. So a lot of his votes are what I think of as anti-partisan votes. He was reacting against being told how to think, basically, in particular by, I'll just say it, by a lot of the closest women in his life. So that's definitely something. But the solution, again, is just connecting. Instead of making an assumption about folks, in my buddy Brandon's case, he's first generation Puerto Rican. So a lot of people were like, hey, you're Puerto Rican. You should vote this way. You should think this way. You should use Latinx. And he was like, screw you. No, like, I'll talk the way I want to talk and think the way I want to think, But the way to connect is instead of using one data point, whether it's your heritage, or your skin color, or your religion, or your whatever, or how you voted at the top of the ticket, is to connect at a human level. Every human being is exactly that, a full three-dimensional human being with a really complex story. I can't be defined by the fact that I was born to a New York Jewish family. I can't also be defined strictly by the fact that I became a Christian in 2000. I can't be defined by the fact that I'm a Met fan. I can be defined by a lot of these things together. And if we want to talk about being human beings, let's connect in that way, as opposed to taking one data point and making a whole story about it and judging somebody based on that one data point that you created, the chaining that we were talking about. You've created the rest of the narrative for me.
Interesting. Based on everything you've talked about, here's my theory of what's gone on over the past, say, 20 or 30 years. I think people were willing to be lectured and told what to think and what to do and how to vote, as long as they felt like they were being accepted by something bigger than themselves that they could be a part of. For the sake of the movement, all right, you know what? I'll change my thought process so I'm more in line with yours. Maybe you're right about that, because I don't want to lose this community of people I'm a part of. But the tipping point came when Overton's window got shifted so far, in either direction, really, where what you're being asked to believe is just honking ridiculous,
Yeah.
And watching a guy in the Olympics who's got XY chromosomes beat the living shit out of women, and both of the guys who fit that description get gold medals in the women's boxing in the Olympics, and we're celebrating these clowns. People went, I know I'm supposed to celebrate this, but they're looking around going, hey, any of you all really think this is right? I mean, is this something really to celebrate? And by the way, does this really affect me personally and my kitchen table all that much? And people were like, you know what? The tipping point has arrived where I am so fatigued from this, and I feel so dumb going along with the party line from people who are telling me what to think and what to do, that now the value of my dignity and thinking what I want and believing what I want and exercising my so-called freedom as an American citizen, you know what? That now matters more to me than being a part of this in crowd anymore. It was a tipping point, I think.
Yeah, no, feeling part of a larger group, a larger cause is really important, because we want to be individuals within the context of a larger people, of a larger community. But there's a lot of us that we can point to a moment where we say, yeah, that's where you lost me,
Well, for sure.
And so for some of us, it was more gradual. It was a series of experiences where I was like, yeah, no, I'm not signed on with that anymore. But it also means that then we have to find other meaningful points of connection, other meaningful community. And, sometimes we make the wrong choice, frankly. Sometimes we end up just plugging into something else that's just as radical, but it just, it feels a little cozier compared to what we're exiting.
Yeah, I think that's the human condition. I mean, in many ways, we look at a Jim Jones or even look at an Adolf Hitler. I remember, you're about my age, in school, we used to marvel at how the Holocaust could have taken place.
Yeah.
How did they get to that?
Yeah.
Nowadays, we know, we understand, we see it, and it's scary. And, to be fair, an example from the right side of the aisle in politics is that, we're holding up a casino baron as the standard bearer for evangelical Christianity in this country. And a lot of people, churchgoers, are going, I'm not buying it. I just don't think Donald Trump is God's chosen one. It's a little hard to fathom. People are like, well, God uses, the most unlikely people. It's like, yeah, well, he looks more like the Antichrist. It sounds more like him than what you're talking about. But there are examples on both sides where the window got shifted too far.
Oh, absolutely.
And people just said, I'm done. But here's the crazy part. I'm not sure people have woken up to the idea that this has become their religion and are, kicking it old school and say going back to church. I'm not sure that's the movement that's come from all this. Would you comment on that? Because you talk about politics and religion. I mean, Are people going to go back to searching for who God really is, or are we all going to become just more collectively agnostic once we realize that the God of politics has betrayed us too?
Yeah. So I can't speak to the bigger picture. I can only speak for myself, my own observations.
By the way, there's a first date conversation for you.
It's great. It's either the start of a beautiful relationship or it's the last conversation you'll have.
It'd be a brave one. Yeah. You'd know real quickly where you stand. Yeah.
I do think that there's not a harm to the gospel. If you believe what I believe, in a risen Christ. I read the New Testament 20 something years ago and I believed it. And I've been reading it ever since. So I believe that. And if you believe that, the gospel cannot be threatened. However, our particular testimony can be damaged, right? So if I am saying that the word is authoritative, and yet I am espousing the virtues of this individual who is not just the most amoral, but the most anti-moral person we could have imagined. You look at any piece, I could open up just about any page of the Bible and it testifies against the words, actions, character of Donald Trump. So if you're holding this character up as your end all be all, and you're just pounding that drum and you're saying that you're a Christian, let's open up our Bibles and let's figure it out. If the Bible opens up to love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast. We got problems now that you're espousing the virtues of Donald Trump. He's on the wrong side of that ledger. If we're looking at this fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, he's on the wrong side of that ledger. You want to look at the six, it says the 6 things, no, the 7 the Lord hates. He's on the wrong side of that ledger too. So,
well, hold on a second. I think we're all clear on that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this isn't a zero-sum game.
It's not a zero-sum game.
The candidates on the left are no better.
Oh, no. But
it's a trick. It's an Aikido Jedi mind trick to get us to believe that politics can somehow be a religion worthy to follow.
Right. Yeah.
There's no God good enough over there.
I'm not making an either or case, nor am I saying that Joe Biden or anybody else, Secretary Pete is the next coming of the Messiah. That's the thing, though, is that once we start to mix religion, introduce this religious language and elevate this person up to messianic levels. I am the chosen one. He said it himself, and he's being uplifted by these churches as this is our guy. Then we got problems. Now I'm going to hold the church to its own standard, or any particular church or any particular pastor to their own standard. Now, if they're saying that I'm going to vote for this person, I don't agree with everything that they're all about, but I have come to this conclusion for this reason. Okay, now we can have a conversation. But if you're saying that if you don't vote for Donald Trump, you're not a Christian, all right, let's sit down and open our Bible. Let's have that conversation. I'm ready to have that conversation.
Well, I think it's fair to say I'm going to vote for this candidate because as a Christian, he's the lesser of two evils and probably better for my interests and God's interests. That's fair.
A lot of my closest friends, relatives, ended up voting for Donald Trump. I didn't. I don't know if you could tell already, but I didn't. I came to a different conclusion because I'm a Christian and because I'm a conservative. But I'm ready to have the conversation. So yeah, I see what you're saying. I did vote for some Republicans at the state and local level. The one that I supported the most happened to be the person who won the state Senate seat, Suzette Valadares, a Republican. And I hope she's a future of the Republican Party. But that's neither here nor there. I like I said, I'm a purple kind of a guy. So,
well, I think most people who think for themselves, independent thinkers, realize that how the planks of political platforms sort themselves out is utterly illogical. Often.
How do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, for example, you've seen the Republican Party become more the champion of the middle class and of the people who are trying to work paycheck to paycheck when that used to be basically the bulwark of the left. Meanwhile, the intellectual elites and the billionaires are more likely to be on the left side than the right side nowadays. And people are like, well, how did we get there? You hear a lot of people say, well, I'm a Reagan Republican or I'm a Kennedy Democrat, and I just feel like my party, I don't recognize it anymore. Yeah. So even as we're sworn to this quote unquote religious viewpoint, in politics, there are no concrete tablets to tell us what the order of our God is. It's subject to change. And that's on the macro level. You can look at the ways that the Republicans and Democrats have shifted towards what the other one used to think here and there, but it's not consistent. And if your belief system is subject to being blown around and tossed by the whim of politics, then it's not a very good core belief system because you're not grounded in anything.
Yeah. And that's where discernment really comes into play.
Yes.
Having clarity on what's really important to you, and then also understanding where your limits are.
I think what happens is if we go on first dates and we get to know each other, the man and the woman are talking about, what's important to you and what do you value. We run a risk, and that's the word I'm going to use, of talking about religion or politics in that context. By and large, whatever that means, I generally recommend against people who are just getting to know each other to delve into that because it's just too fraught because society has made it such.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, hey, let's figure out whether we get along here, whether we're attracted to each other on the first date, or when a man approaches a woman, he decides whether he's going to get her number or not. But, somewhere along the line, if this is going to start feeling relationship-y, or even if it feels like you and I are going to spend some time together, I need to know what you got going on at your core. What do you believe in?
Yeah.
What God do you pray to? What lever do you pull in the voting booth? What do you eat? How do you spend money? What do you believe in terms of parenting? Where I think we've gone awry and the wheels have fallen off, and this brings it back full circle, Corey, is that people feel like because of how we've been led and influenced by media, that this has to be about politics or religion, when it really could just be about what do you like to do on vacation? And that's not a partisan issue. So there are so many levels of how we as human beings connect and the factors that decide whether we get along or not. And I think people are, again, I'm going to use the A word, addicted to defaulting to getting into a political argument and or a religious argument. And what we've been conditioned to do is be defensive and find faults in other people's beliefs. We pick other people apart. And I don't even think that's fair as humans on the connective level.
Yeah, no, and you bring up a really important point. So what it is identifying the actual values and priorities. And in order to do that, sometimes you have to cut through a certain politician, a certain race, a certain candidate, a certain issue.
And lots of assumptions you have to set
A lot
aside.
of assumptions. So I'll tell you a quick story. There's a fellow named Joe Walsh who was he was part of the Tea Party wave in I think it was a 2010 election. He became a national radio show host, conservative guy. He still considers himself, or what he calls, in his words, a rabid gun rights activist. And Joe was invited to a bunch of shows and happened to be on a panel with another buddy who became a friend of mine, a guy named Fred Guttenberg. Fred tragically lost his daughter in the Florida shooting in, I think it was 2017, I want to say. 2016, and his daughter, who died in that high school.
Are you talking about Parkland?
Yeah, in Parkland. She had, just coincidentally, she happened to be born one day to the day, same year as my middle kid, the older of my two boys. And anyway, so Fred was invited, and he's a legislation activist. He, wants gun safety measures implemented. So Fred and Joe were invited onto these panels, and the networks all thought, oh, they're going to have at it. It's going to be great. The fireworks are going to go. What Fred and Joe ended up doing in the green room, after the second or third time they were on the same panel, they started getting at what you're talking about, at their priorities, at their values. And what they found was, even though they supported different types of legislation, they were on, quote unquote, the opposite side of the issue. They found that their priorities and their values were very, very similar.
How about that?
Yeah, they ended up becoming great friends, or even touring the country together saying, two dads defending democracy. This is how you do it. They still disagree on legislation, but their values align very similarly. That's what's important.
Yeah, I mean, just because she's a female doesn't mean she's a threat to democracy. When you go out on a date with her. The gender wars, the gender politics, the division being driven between men and women, the threats to the family unit, the pressure on the birth rate, all of those things we talk about around here all the time have a subtle influence on the discourse we share with women as we get to know them.
Yeah.
And I think to kind of close this out, Corey, it comes down to this. We need to be a lot more human with each other than being reduced to automatons who are fed social media narratives to go repeat to others out there and try to beat people over the head with them. And, the old phrase that's used for people who are religious zealots is they become Bible thumpers.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people become political thumpers also. And it's just really annoying. We're all really sick of it. And post-COVID, now that we're all back out there being social again, I think we as men need to not be the standard bearers for one party or the other or one religion for the other, but for making women feel safe and comfortable, bringing warm levity back to this world and communicating with female human beings again. And if that's our priority when we're meeting and interacting with each other out there, I think the world will be a better place.
I think so too, man. I think so too. And I would say just work it out like you're working out a muscle. Today's back day, today's chest day, today's leg day, work it out like a muscle. Your ability to sit with someone and see them and hear them and leave open the possibility that you'll arrive at that moment where you can say to them, oh, I never thought of it that way. You're listening carefully enough to ask that follow-up question and that they'll say something where you can say, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. That's when somebody feels listened to, and that's when you can really connect.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of fun, actually, if we allow ourselves to go through the process and enjoy the experience of realizing that there's someone we're talking to who actually is a lot like us. We have a lot in common, even in terms of our core values and belief system, although we're approaching it from completely different ways that looked like they were antagonistic towards each other at the start.
Can I get really blunt for a second? Really
Sure.
A little bit raw? Okay, so here's the thing. At the end of the day, when I have that attitude, when I put on that disposition, I get laid a lot more often. That's what it comes down to, man.
Well, it's true.
The guys who are listening and really connecting to their first dates or their wives or, they get laid a lot more often than the guys who are like, big swinging dicks, if you will. Sorry to get
Well, I mean, you can have a big swinging dick and, once you do get laid, they'll come back for more.
Yeah.
But
that's the idea, man.
But up front, you're onto something here.
Yeah.
And not to open an entire other can of worms on the show. Maybe this will be a good topic for next time.
Yeah.
But, the whole mansplaining thing from the feminists.
Yeah.
What women don't realize is we as men mansplain each other. It's just in our nature. It's not something that we do to disrespect them. But man, a woman will not feel safe and comfortable with you until she feels heard, until she feels valued, until she feels like maybe you want something other than the sex. And when you sit and you listen to a woman, you know what value we get as a man? It isn't just that, oh, she opens up to us and she gets horny for us. We gain a lot more field vision as to whether we're going to be able to get along with this woman above and beyond the sex or not.
Yeah. That's
and
true.
guys just completely overlook this.
Right.
And meanwhile, that's exactly what in turn gets the ball rolling. It's kind of like a snowball effect, right? The more we listen, the more we get to know her. We get to decide whether we like her or not. We arrive at the conclusion, yeah, you know what? I like you. And she starts agreeing.
Yeah.
Because you've listened to each other. And now that we're connecting, she feels safe. And then when she feels safe, she feels horny, and voila. That's probably the more scientific analysis, if you will, of why you're getting laid more when you listen more.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. His name is Corey Nathan. He's from Santa Clarita, California. He is the host of Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other, which I think we've done a pretty good job of today. We've set the example there, Mr. Corey.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah. And when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Nathan, Nathan, you will be magically teleported to politicsandreligion.us. You don't have to remember that. You can just go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Nathan. Remember Corey Nathan's last name, and you'll get a chance to listen to his really, really solid podcast for yourself. Corey Nathan, thank you so much for joining us again. This has been a great conversation. Appreciate you, man.
Scott, thanks for having me back on, man. It's been great visiting with you again.
Yeah, for sure. And gentlemen, you'll have a great time if you go to mountaintoppodcast.com. Get in on our 3 sponsors, Jocko Willink's Company Origin in Maine, The Keyport, and also Heroes Soap. When you use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10, you'll get 10% off your order with all 3 of our longtime sponsors. Gentlemen, check in with the master classes. Every month we do a deep dive into a specific topic that covers you being better with women, you being a better man. We do one at the end of every month. They're wildly popular. You can check in on all of those and more when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.